I don't usually believe in haunted basement stories or anything like that, but what happened to me at that job, I can't explain it. I started working at the company about 3 months ago, and from the beginning, something felt off. It wasn't visible, but you could feel it, like a sensation in the air. Everyone at the office seemed normal at first glance. Some people were friendly, others more serious. But as the days passed, I began to notice that something was wrong. The interactions were cold, disconnected, as if people were physically there but not mentally. One day, a colleague, who was super friendly, suddenly stopped talking to me, for no reason, as if we had fought. There was no reason for it, and I felt a pressure in my chest as if something was watching me. That was just the beginning. I didn't want to be paranoid, but little by little, I started noticing other signs. Some colleagues would just disappear during the day, and no one seemed to notice. This happened with a guy named Marcos. He disappeared for an entire week, and when he came back, he was different. It wasn't just his appearance, it was as if he were disconnected. He couldn't hold a conversation properly anymore. Seemed more distant. I asked a few colleagues where he had been, and they just said he was in private meetings. But no one knew exactly where those meetings were. Of course, the official excuse was always that he was in some training or activity outside the office, but I knew something was very wrong. The atmosphere at the office became increasingly strange. I was starting to feel uncomfortable, but I tried not to think too much about it until one night I decided to stay a little longer to finish a report. Most people had already left and the building was too quiet, as if it had swallowed all the sounds. It was then that I heard something coming from the lower floor. It wasn't a normal sound like a fan or a computer running. It was more like whispers, but very muffled. I went to the common area to see if anyone was still around, but it was all empty. Then I remembered a rumor I'd heard from one of the receptionists about a basement in the building, but no one knew exactly what happened there. I didn't want to go, but curiosity got the better of me. I knew something was wrong and needed to find out what was going on. I found a hidden door behind some file boxes. It was locked, but it wasn't hard to open. What I saw downstairs sent a chill down my spine. The basement wasn't what I had imagined. It had nothing to do with what the office was supposed to be. It was large and dark, with a table in the center and some chairs around it. The air was thick with a strange smell, like something moldy. On the wall, there was an old black and white photo of a meeting that looked like it had been taken in the 1960s. I didn't know what it was, but somehow it gave me the creeps. I stood there for a while, observing everything, until I heard a voice, not from a person, but from something, presence. When I turned around, the door I had used to enter had closed by itself, and suddenly a series of images flashed in my mind. Images of meetings that had taken place there. Secret, disturbing meetings. I couldn't understand everything, but something was very wrong. My breath caught when I realized I wasn't alone down there. Footsteps echoed, slow and heavy, as if someone was walking deliberately. My heart raced, and I tried to hide behind one of the piles of boxes nearby. A dim light in the basement flickered, casting shadows that danced on the walls. I didn't know if my mind was playing tricks on me or if there was really someone there. The footsteps stopped right near where I was, and a suffocating silence filled the space. The strange smell seemed to have gotten stronger, almost unbearable. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, I heard a low, indecipherable whisper coming from the same direction. My feet were frozen, but my survival instinct screamed at me to get out of there as quickly as possible. I gathered all the courage I could, and with my heart pounding in my throat, I took a step toward the door. To my surprise, it was open again, but it seemed like something was different from when I had entered. The atmosphere in the hallway had changed. The air was heavier, almost palpable. I wanted to run, but it felt like something was watching me, evaluating me. When I finally reached the door, I looked back, just out of reflex. That's when I saw it. In the darkest corner of the basement, there was a figure, or at least it looked like one. I can't explain exactly what it was, but it seemed humanoid, motionless, as if it was watching me too. I ran without looking back, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the empty hallway until I reached the elevator. When the door closed, I felt like I was leaving something down there, but also like part of it was still with me. When the elevator ascended, it felt like each second lasted an eternity. The light flickered once, and I almost panicked, pressing the buttons repeatedly as if that would get me to the upper floor faster. When the doors finally opened, I almost stumbled out, my heart still pounding in my chest. The floor was strangely silent. It seemed like everyone had already left, but something didn't add up. The desks were clean, the chairs perfectly arranged as if no one had been there all day. Even though it was late, it didn't make sense. I grabbed my things, trying not to think about what I had seen or felt in the basement. I just wanted to leave. On my way home, I felt like I was being followed. I turned around a few times, but the street was empty, only illuminated by the yellow streetlights. The silence was unsettling, interrupted only by the sound of my own footsteps. I entered my apartment and locked the door, making sure to lock the chain as well. I collapsed on the couch, trying to process what had happened. But as I struggled to forget, I noticed something that made me even more disturbed. The smell. That same metallic, nauseating smell from the basement was in my apartment. My stomach turned. I quickly got up from the couch, trying to identify where the smell was coming from. I opened the windows, looked in the corners, but couldn't find anything out of place. Still, the odor seemed to be getting stronger, as if it was impregnated in the walls. That's when I noticed that the kitchen light was on. I was absolutely sure I had turned it off before leaving. My whole body froze, and my feet were glued to the floor for a few seconds. Everything in me screamed to run, but at the same time, I needed to know what was happening. Hesitantly, I went to the kitchen. There was nothing there, at least at first glance. The light was indeed on, but everything seemed intact. That's when I noticed a detail that made me freeze again. My notebook, the one I always took to work, was open on the table, but I was sure it had been in my bag. I approached cautiously and saw something written in big letters that I didn't recognize. "You should not have stayed." My heart raced. I grabbed the notebook with trembling hands, trying to find any clue that it was just a prank. Who could have written this? And how did the notebook get out of my bag? I looked around. Every sound in the house seemed amplified, like I was being watched. I went to the front door to make sure it was locked. It was. I checked the windows too, and nothing seemed broken. So how did someone get in? I started to wonder if I was becoming paranoid, but the message in the notebook was real, and I knew I hadn't written it. That's when I heard a muffled sound coming from the hallway leading to the bedroom. It was like dragged footsteps, slow but distinct. My breath caught in my throat. I thought about calling the police, but my phone was on the kitchen counter exactly where I had left it. The hallway seemed darker than it should have, as if the light wasn't working properly. I grabbed a knife from the drawer, not that I knew what to do with it, and started walking toward the sound, each of my steps echoing in the heavy silence of the house. When I reached the hallway, the sound stopped. An oppressive silence filled the air, and I could hear my blood pulsing in my ears. With the knife firmly in my hand, I looked at the floor for any clue that could explain the noise, but there was nothing. No sign that anyone had passed through there. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but my mind was racing. That's when I noticed something strange at the bedroom door. The doorknob was slightly turned, as if someone had just touched it. I gathered my courage and pushed the door with my fingertips, holding the knife in the other hand. The door opened slowly, revealing my bedroom. Everything seemed normal until I saw the window. It was wide open, and the cold night air was flooding the room. I ran to close it, looking outside, hoping to see someone fleeing, but the yard was empty, illuminated only by the faint streetlight. As I closed the window, I noticed something on the floor just below the sill. A muddy footprint, as if a barefoot had stepped there. The mark on the floor seemed fresh, the outlines clear, as if someone had just entered or left through the window. My heart raced. Whoever it was had been inside my room while I was at home. I started searching the room, opening closet doors, checking under the bed, trying to. When I moved into the apartment, I was excited. It was my chance to start over in a big city with my dog Max by my side. The building was old, but well located and reasonably priced, which seemed like a miracle. Right from the first week, small things started to bother me. First, it was the mail. I received letters addressed to people I had never heard of, and even after informing the doorman, the letters kept coming. Then, there were the smells. Occasionally, the apartment would be filled with a sour, metallic odor that seemed to come from the floor, but it would disappear as quickly as it appeared. Max, who had always been a calm and friendly dog, began to behave strangely. He would growl at empty corners and avoid walking near the basement door, which I found curious, but didn't think much of it. Everything worsened when I had to go to the basement for the first time. The caretaker told me that the washing machines were down there, so I decided to take Max with me to explore. As soon as we went down, his behavior completely changed. He started pulling on the leash, barking frantically at a rusty iron door at the end of the hallway. The sound of his barking echoed in a strange, almost muffled way. When I approached, I felt an inexplicable chill. There was nothing there, just a locked door. The caretaker appeared and, seeing my discomfort, simply said, "This part of the basement has been closed for years. There's nothing there. Best to leave it alone." The way he said it, hurriedly and without looking me in the eye, only made me more intrigued. That night, after the visit to the basement, Max wouldn't stop barking, mostly at the entrance door. I thought he was just worked up on the experience, so I tried to calm him down. However, in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of something falling in the kitchen. I rushed there and found one of the cabinets open with broken plates on the floor. Max was standing in the hallway, his fur bristling, staring intently at the kitchen. My heart was racing. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had left the cabinet poorly closed, but something didn't make sense. The plates were at the back of the cabinet, and the door had a magnetic lock. In the following days, things only got worse. I began hearing strange sounds at night, like footsteps coming from the floor above, even though I knew the apartment was empty. Max started refusing food and completely avoiding certain areas of the house, like the hallway leading to the bathroom. Once, while I was in the shower, I felt a cold draft pass over me, but all the windows were shut. That's when I began to investigate more about the building. The caretaker wasn't much of a talker, but the old residents seemed to know something. One of them, an elderly man on the third floor, told me the building had stories, but that it was better for me to not dig too deep. One night, exhausted and getting more paranoid, I decided to install a camera in the living room to try and capture what was happening while I slept. I turned off the light and went to the bedroom, but I couldn't sleep properly. Max was restless, growling softly at the foot of the bed. In the morning, on edge, I went to review the footage. At first it seemed normal until around 3 a.m. when something changed. The camera captured the living room cabinet door slowly opening as if someone was there. Then I saw an indistinct shadow cross the room, passing directly by the couch. My stomach twisted and Max began barking at the screen while I watched. That same afternoon, I decided to go to the basement again, but this time during the day and with Max by my side. The place seemed even heavier than before, even with sunlight filtering through the dirty windows. I noticed marks on the concrete floor like scratches and stains that looked like rust, but I suspected there was something else. Then I saw something that made me freeze. In the corner behind some old boxes was a partially burned piece of newspaper. The headline talked about a terrible crime that had occurred decades ago, the murder of an entire family in the basement. The main suspect was never found. After reading that article, it felt like the air in the basement grew heavier, almost impossible to breathe. The feeling of being watched returned full force. Max began growling and pulling on the leash as if he wanted to get me out of there. I didn't think twice and quickly ran up the stairs, almost tripping, with Max on my heels. I slammed the basement door so hard that the entire apartment seemed to shake. I decided I had to leave, but as I packed a few things to spend the night away, something strange happened. I heard footsteps upstairs, heavy, deliberate steps, as if someone were walking down the hallway. My heart raced. Max went on the defensive, barking at the stairs that led to the upper apartment's hall. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, my only thought being to protect myself. I climbed slowly, one step at a time, trying not to make a sound. When I got upstairs, the hallway was empty, but the door to my room, which I had left open, was shut. I slowly approached, holding the knife tightly. When I turned the handle, I felt a strange resistance, as if something or someone was holding the door from the other side. My heart was about to explode. I took a deep breath, gathered all the courage I had left, and forced the door open with all my might. It opened suddenly, slamming against the wall, and the room was empty. Everything seemed exactly as I had left it, except for one thing. The window was open, and the cold wind made the curtains sway like living shadows. Max was uneasy, growling softly, his fur bristling. I walked over to the window and shut it, trying to ignore the knot of fear forming in my stomach. It was then that I noticed something on the floor near the bed. It was a dark, almost black mark that spread across the rug, as if something had been dragged away from there. I froze, trying to process what I was seeing. The stain looked fresh, but there was no smell and no sign of where it started or ended. Max started barking hysterically, staring at the closet. Something inside me told me I shouldn't open it, but at the same time I knew I had to. With trembling hands, I pulled open the closet door. Inside the closet, there was nothing but empty shelves and a lone hanger swaying gently as if someone had just touched it. But what made me pull back was the sound, a soft, drag sigh, coming from somewhere nearby, but not from the closet. I looked at Max, who was now slowly backing away, growling at something behind me. My heart stopped. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it. In the dimness of the room, leaning in the corner near the window, a figure was standing. It wasn't clear, but it was human, or something that wanted to look human. Max barked so loudly it sounded desperate, and suddenly the figure leaned slightly forward, as if observing me with curiosity. At that moment, my breath was stuck in my chest, and the only thing I could think of was getting out of that apartment. But my body felt frozen, as if something invisible was holding me in place. Max began tugging at my pants with his teeth as if he wanted to drag me out of there. That was what finally broke the trance. Without looking back at the figure, I ran toward the door, Max right behind me, barking as if his life depended on it. When I reached the living room door, I felt something cold on my shoulder, like a freezing hand trying to pull me back. The touch was so intense that a shiver ran down my spine, and my vision blurred for a second. I screamed, pushing the door open with all my strength, and threw myself out of the apartment, nearly falling into the hallway. Max followed right behind, barking frantically as I tried to lock the door with my hands trembling so much I could barely hold the key. I ran for the stairs, not looking back. Each step I took felt heavier, as if the building itself was trying to pull me back inside. Max was frantic, pulling on the leash as if he knew something terrible was behind us. When I finally reached the ground floor, I didn't hesitate. I ran out the front door, not looking at the other apartments, not wanting to know what was happening behind the walls. I breathed in the fresh night air, trying to catch my breath, but I still felt that presence as if I was being watched. I looked at Max, who was now calm but with his fur standing on end, as if he knew we weren't safe yet. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't go back to that apartment, not even to get my things. I didn't understand what had happened there, but one thing was certain. That place wasn't just an old building with a crime history. It was something more, something that didn't want anyone around, something that would haunt me forever. I stayed there for a long time, trying to process everything that had happened, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I looked at Max, who seemed calmer, but with his eyes fixed on some point ahead, as if something invisible was still there. I went to the car with no clear direction, just getting away from everything I knew, too scared to look back. I knew I couldn't go back, but my mind was full of doubts. How could something so ordinary, like a simple apartment, turn into such a deep place of terror? What was in that basement that triggered so much violence, so much hate, so much pain? What was that spirit, or whatever it was, that preyed on my weaknesses? I drove aimlessly, thinking about what I had just lived through. The city lights seemed so distant, so lifeless, as if the world had shifted into another reality, a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. I knew it wouldn't be easy to forget what I experienced that cursed night, but at least I was alive. I just didn't know for how long. Now, weeks later, I still wonder if I will ever understand what happened in that apartment. The feeling of being watched never disappeared. Sometimes, even in peaceful places, I get a chill down my neck, as if something invisible is following me, waiting for the right moment to appear again. And every time I look at Max, he reminds me of everything we went through together, everything we faced that night. Did the evil really leave? Or in some way, is it just waiting for the right moment to return? I still don't have answers. I only know that, for now, my life moved on. But the shadows of that place continue to haunt me, and I know I can't run from them forever.